Introduction to the Science of Hadith by Ibn Salah al-Shahrazuri, 577 to 643. The most influential book on the Science of Hadith. Category 13. Anomalous Hadith. Ma'rifat al-Shadh. We heard from Yunus ibn Abdul A'la, who said, Shafi'i said, the anomalous hadith is not one which is a single reliable transmitter and no one else relates. Rather, the anomalous hadith is one which a reliable transmitter relates, which is in conflict with what other people relate. Abu Ya'la al-Khalili al-Qazwini related something similar to this from Shafi'i and a number of other Hijazis. He said, the view of the experts in hadith is that an anomalous hadith is one having only a single isnad, which a single teacher, reliable or not, is anomalous in transmitting it. An anomalous hadith from an unreliable transmitter is rejected and may not be accepted. One from a reliable transmitter is left in abeyance and may not be cited as proof. The expert Abu Abdullah al-Hakim said that the anomalous hadith is one which a single reliable individual is alone in transmitting and which lacks a parallel version, asl, in agreement with the version in the hands of the reliable transmitter. He said that the shadh hadith differs from the defective hadith mu'allal in that a defective hadith contains a known defect indicating a location of the error in it, and in the case of the shadh hadith, no defect in it is known in such a fashion. There is no question that what Shafi judged to be shadh is a form of the shadh hadith which may not be accepted. As for the statements we gave from the others, there is some other question about the hadith which an upright, retentive and precise transmitter is alone in relating, like the hadith that follows. Acts are judged by acceptance. إنما الأعمال بالنيات. Acts are judged by intentions. This is an isolated hadith fard, which Umar ibn al-Khattab, God be pleased with him, alone transmitted from the Messenger of God. Alqamah ibn al-Waqqas was alone in transmitting it from Umar Muhammad ibn Ibrahim, who was alone in transmitting it from Alqamah, and Yahya bin Sa'id al-Ansari was alone in transmitting it from Muhammad ibn Ibrahim, according to what the scholars of hadith regard as correct. A clearer instance of a shadh hadith than this hadith is the hadith of Abdullah ibn Dinar from Ibn Umar, to the effect that the Prophet said that he forbade the sale and giftship of clientship. Abdullah ibn Dinar alone transmitted it. Another hadith is the case of Malik from Zuhri from Anas, from the effect that the Prophet, peace be upon him, entered Mecca with a helmet lining on his head. Malik was alone in transmitting it from Zuhri. All these hadith are included in the two sahihs, despite each having a single isnad with a single reliable transmitter alone giving it. There are more than a few similar cases of this in the book Gharaib al-Sahih, Rare Sound Hadith. Indeed, Muslim ibn Hajjaj said Zuhri relates about 90 reports from the Prophet, peace be upon him, which no one else transmits with good isnads, and God knows best. The doctrines of the hadith authorities which we mentioned and those which we did not should make it plain to you that the question of the shadh hadith is not as clear-cut as Abu Ya'la al-Khalili and Hakim represents it. Rather, the question requires making the distinction which we will explain. We maintain that when a transmitter is alone in relating something, it should be examined. If the hadith he alone transmitted is in conflict with what someone superior to him in retentiveness of that material and accuracy related, the hadith he was alone in relating is rejected as anomalous, shadh. If there is in a transmission no conflict with what someone else transmitted, and it is something he and no one else related, then the transmitter who is alone in relating it is examined. If he is upright and retentive, and his exactitude and precision may be trusted, the hadith he is alone in transmitting is accepted, and he being alone in transmitting the hadith does not impugn it, as was true in the case of the previous examples. If he was one of those whose retention and exactitude in transmission may not be trusted for those hadith which he is alone in transmitting, then his being alone in transmitting the hadith pierces it and tears it from the domain of sound hadith. Beyond that, the anomalous hadith oscillate between various levels according to the state they are in. If the transmitter who was alone in relating the anomalous hadith is not far from the level of the retentive and precise transmitter whose unparalleled transmissions are accepted, we regard that hadith of his as fair, and we do not put it in the category of weak hadith. If he falls far short of that level, we reject the hadith he alone transmits and is considered an unfamiliar shadh hadith, shadh munkar. From that, it may be deduced that there are two subcategories of the rejected anomalous hadith. One is the contradictory isolated hadith, al-fard al-mukhalif. The second is the isolated hadith, the transmitter of which does not possess the sufficient reliability and precision to counteract the unfamiliarity and weakness that isolation and anomaly engender. God knows best. Category 14. Unfamiliar hadith. Ma'rifat al-munkar min al-hadith. We read that the expert Abu Bakr Ahmed ibn Harun al-Bardiji wrote that the unfamiliar hadith is one which a single man is alone in transmitting, while its text is not known from any transmission but his, not from the line of transmission he gave from any other. Bardiji treated them as a group and made no distinctions. In the remarks of many of the scholars of hadith, we find a blanket condemnation of the hadith isolated as rejected, unfamiliar or shadh. إطلاق الحكم على التفرد بالرد أو النكرة أو الشذوذ. The correct course in this matter is to make the distinction which we explained above. In the discussion of the anomalous hadith, on this subject we say unfamiliar hadith fall into two subcategories, in accordance with what we said concerning the anomalous hadith, for unfamiliar means the same thing as anomalous. An example of the first category of the unfamiliar hadith, and it is the isolated hadith munfarad, which contradicts what the reliable transmitters relate, is the relation of Malik from Zuhri, from Ali bin Hussein, from Umar ibn Uthman, from Osama bin Zayd, from the Messenger of God, peace be upon him. A Muslim may not inherit from an unbeliever, and an unbeliever may not inherit from a Muslim. Malik contradicted the other reliable transmitters by saying, Umar ibn Uthman, Muslim, the author of the Sahih, said in his Kitab al-Tamyiz, the book on discrimination, that all those who relate the hadith from other students of Zuhri say Amr ibn Uthman, and he mentioned that Malik used to point to the house of Umar ibn Uthman with his hand as if he was aware that the other transmitters disagreed with him. Amr and Umar were both sons of Uthman. However, this hadith comes only from Amr. Muslim and others are judged Malik to have erred in it. God knows best. An example of the second subcategory of the unfamiliar hadith, that is the isolated hadith fard, the transmitter of which does not possess reliability and exactitude sufficient to allow him to transmit it by himself, is the hadith we heard from Abu Zuhair, Yahya bin Muhammad bin Qais, from Hisham ibn Urwa, from his father, from Aisha, God be pleased with her, that the Messenger of God, peace be upon him, said, "Eat fresh dates with dried dates." When Satan sees that, it angers him, and he says, "The son of Adam lived until he ate the new with the shabby." Abu Zuhair was alone in transmitting it. He was a pious teacher whose hadith Muslim included in his book. However, he did not attain the stature of those unique transmissions were suffered. Of those whose unique transmissions are suffered. God knows best. Stay tuned.